Good morning, everyone. Pam Jacobson, your host of Three Things You Need to Know. Welcome. Uh, Sorry for the absence the last couple of weeks. I'm actually changing up the format of the show. For the past year, those of you that have been following me, I've been very focused on health foundation, health optimization, helping all of you learn first and foremost that it's your responsibility to be healthy, and secondly, how to do that. So we're using the kind of four pillar system or template, if you will, to make that not necessarily easier, but at least make it. For me, I'm sort of a list person. So if I can kind of check that I've done these things in the day, it just makes it easier for me. So that's sort of how my brain works. And so what I've done over this past year is really talked almost now ad nauseum about the four pillar system: sleep optimization, stress response management, movement or exercise, and then nutrition. And I've kind of broken it up in every which way that I can over the past year and given you really, I think, a pretty detailed level of information and resources and tools and ideas and troubleshooting to help you begin to create your own health foundation aimed at optimizing your health, right? So we started out 2021 with a plan to have the best health, and I think that we've laid some good groundwork over the past year for that to happen. So I'm going to change the format going forward in that I will do a program once a month rather than every week, and once a month we will focus on a specific topic that will be related to helping you live not only longer but live healthier, right? So lifespan and health span, right? Having good quality of life. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live a long time if I'm not going to have a high quality of life. So really, quality of life is, I think, tantamount. And what you may not know is our scientific field has turned their attention to the field of anti-aging, longevity, health span, lifespan, and wellness and restoration of function. Finally, we're getting a lot of press and there's a lot of research going on. And I really want to turn my attention to, because I think a lot of times things happen that you may not be aware of, right? If you don't have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the field of medicine and in research, you may not be aware that there are things out there that are happening that you could be taking advantage of. So going forward, the program will be monthly and it will be focused on a particular topic, and it will always be focused on topics that are information that you can use right away, whether it's a new supplement or a new drug, or in the case of today, a new biometric tracking capacity that we've had for some time. But again, it's not been something that's been really accessible to the public. And so you may not be aware of it. And I believe it's a tool that can be very helpful. So for those of you just joining, this program and all of those going forward assumes that you are already doing the work for health optimization, that you're doing the work to create your health foundation. And if you're not sure what that work looks like, please take the time to go back and look at the episodes I've done over this past year, because I really kind of lay it all out for you, and really do a deep dive in each of those four pillars to help you understand what does a daily self-care routine need to look like, and give you the ability with that template to sort of check those boxes. So assuming that you that are watching this episode are well on your way to having some type of a daily self-care routine, I want to talk about what the current research in all sectors, right? This is some pharmaceutical research. This is actual data that's coming from the collection of information from a biometric tracking device I'm going to talk about. And this is even some retrospective data looking back at one of the biggest, I think, of our time, particularly in our culture, one of the biggest issues in health and longevity right now, which is metabolic disease. And for those of you who don't know what metabolic disease is, you can think of it as along the spectrum of obesity, diabetes, type 2 diabetes. But what I want to say right away is that when we think of type 2 diabetes, most of us immediately think of people who are obese or overweight. And what we understand now is that is absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. Absolutely any person of any culture, of any size, can have type 2 diabetes, but certainly can be on the spectrum of or on the trajectory. You just don't wake up one day with a disease like type 2 diabetes. It takes literally decades. This starts in really early, even childhood and early teen years. We start to lay the groundwork for metabolic dysfunction or metabolic disease. And it is one of the most concerning and destructive issues for health span and longevity. So I want to talk about it because it's come up for me personally considerably often in the last couple of months, as well as in the client population that I work with. And the way that that's occurred is, as many of you know, I talk about, I'm a constant learner on a daily basis. When I'm in my car, I always have some kind of a podcast on. Usually it pertains to health and wellness and functional medicine. Oftentimes research based. I listen to a lot of scientists and researchers and try to be at least up on what is currently going on out there so that I can report that information and use it back with my clients. And then I also have my own health, right? I track my own stuff. I look at my blood. I look at my biometrics through the tracking devices that I use. And I'm able to detect early on when something's not going right. I mean, just like you, I have to constantly reset my intention and refine my daily self-care plan, especially as I'm aging. This is my 60th year, right? I'll turn 60 in August. And things are changing in my body, and my body's changing in the way that it deals with the foods that I eat and my stress and my, the nights that I don't have great sleep. And so I have to constantly be refining my approach to my daily self-care plan. And for me, I've noticed as I've aged, much less tolerance for the consumption of foods that will dysregulate my blood sugar. But what I know how important glucose control is. I know how important it is to control that through diet. I didn't know really probably until the last several years how critical exercise was, how that can immediately balance your blood sugar even when you've done a bad job with your meal, which is why just going for a walk after a big meal can be extremely helpful in the way that your body manages the heavy load that it's gotten from that meal. So I've known those things, but what I didn't know is how many things can impact glucose control, like poor sleep, like stress, like toxins in your environment. There are so many reasons why blood sugar control and glucose utilization in the body can be impacted. It's not just about diet and exercise, which is why I think it explains why we can see someone like me, for instance, who has, I think, a reasonably decent diet most of the time. I exercise very regularly, anywhere from 4 to 6 times a week, various types of exercise. I am pretty strict about the way I manage my sleep and reasonably good about stress response management. Yet I can see on blood tests and just in generally the way I feel how intolerant I've become of glucose control, especially with foods that I'm eating, but no real in the moment way to track that. I have no way to know, if I do X, like coffee in the morning, and I put this type of creamer in it, or I do this type of thing in my lunch, how is that impacting my blood sugar? I don't have information on, though I can track my exercise, I can't track how that impacts my blood sugar. I'm not able to really see moment to moment the changes. And recently, that has become something that has risen to the top of the chain in terms of importance for me personally. And then I have all of a sudden quite a handful of diagnosed type 2 diabetics, severe diabetics on medication that are already showing the really significant negative fallout from having type 2 diabetes, things like, loss of blood flow into the lower body, and vision changes, and kidney damage, and cardiovascular disease progression. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible disease. It really basically just destroys all of the body systems. And you can have it. You can have the early stages of it creating this destruction in your body and absolutely not know it, and not necessarily know it from your annual blood work that your doctor does. So I think it's really important. This is almost a public service announcement type of program where I want all of you to really wake up and understand that just because you are, exercising a few times a week, and, your diet's not terrible, there are many things that impact glucose control, not the least of which is your genetics and your own unique, makeup, that I think that it's important to get more information. Now, how do you get more information? Well, there's a couple of things. You can certainly work with a practitioner like me. I can run blood tests. I can, advise you in terms of what I'm seeing about where it looks like you are on the spectrum in terms of moving toward a diagnosis like type 2 diabetes. But metabolic dysfunction happens for, like I said, years before you actually get the diagnosis of diabetes. By the time you've progressed enough to meet the criteria for diabetes, there's been a considerable amount of damage that may or may not be, completely reversible. So it really behooves you to know where you're at on that spectrum of metabolic disease. And most of us are on that spectrum somewhere. And so there are some blood laboratory tests that we can use to help with that. Certainly an evaluation and a consultation looking at what your current symptoms are, all of those things, looking at some genetics can be helpful. But by and large, one of, I think, the most important, fascinating, exciting developments is continuous glucose monitoring. So many of you probably are aware of this. Maybe you've seen somebody that has the little white disc that they kind of wear on the back of their arm. And again, this has largely been something that has only been used in patients who already have a diabetes diagnosis. But there are organizations out there, Stanford being one of them, their Innovations Lab, that was like, why would you wait until somebody has diabetes when you could use this as a tool to detect way ahead of time and intervene and stop that person from actually ever getting to that diagnosis? And so they are on a mission to make continuous glucose monitoring more accessible to the general public. This should be something you could walk into your pharmacy and purchase for yourself, right? It should be something that your insurance company pays for, but the reality is insurance companies only pay for disease. They don't really pay for wellness. It's really a backwards system, but it's the reality. And so, these efforts, like what's happening at Stanford, really are there to prevent disease, to educate the public, to create wellness, to create health span and lifespan. And continuous glucose monitoring could potentially be one, I think, of the most important, at least of our time right now, ways to dramatically positively impact lifespan and health span, because it's able to give you real-time, constant information that's actionable. Right? So an example would be, I wear my continuous glucose monitor and I test out what happens when I have my cup of coffee in the morning with my scoop of collagen and my MCT oil, no glycemic load creamer, and then just a little dollop of just a regular vanilla dairy creamer that's got maybe 8 grams of carbs in it. And I want to see what happens then after I consume that. What happens to my blood sugar? What was it before? And what happens after I consume it? Do I get a big spike? And over my day, how many spikes do I get? And what is the difference between what my baseline glucose numbers are and what happens every time I'm exercising on the days I have poor sleep the night before? What happens when I exercise? Does it impact it if I exercise really hard? What happens when I just do yoga? So there's so much information that can be gleaned from this one tiny little disc that is really no big deal. They're not expensive to make. They are really easy for anybody to use. It's simply you just attach it to your body and you connect it to your smartphone, and it can give you constant information. The problem has been access, right? And so for the last couple of months, especially with these new significant diabetic patients that I had asked them to ask their physician, and this would be their internist, their endocrinologist, their nephrologist. In one case, I've got a pretty advanced diabetic person with some kidney failure already. Ask their physicians to prescribe a continuous glucose monitor. 100% of the patients' feedback to me was, my doctor said no, because my insurance company probably won't pay for it. I'm already on medication. I already have the diagnosis. I'm on medication, and I'm already well controlled in terms of the way the medical establishment would consider somebody to be well controlled. And it's maddening, honestly, absolutely maddening, because it's first of all, it's probably true. Insurance companies don't want to pay for this. But the reality is it's not expensive. Most of us can afford it. But because you need a prescription, until now, you've needed a physician to prescribe that for you. So it's very maddening. And it makes it so that only some people are going to have access. So what I did was go on a quest for myself. It was absolutely 100% for me. I was like, the hell with that. I want my own continuous glucose monitor. I've got to figure out how the hell to get one. And I started to look, and I was running into some of those troubles. Now, mind you, my partner's a physician. All my friends are doctors. I could easily get one. I could just call up somebody and say, listen, would you prescribe this? And I don't care if my insurance company pays for it. However, that doesn't apply to almost all of you out there watching. You don't have access. You don't have somebody to prescribe it. And perhaps you're not in a position to pay whatever that cost would be, maybe a couple $100s. So as my life has always worked, when I get excited about something and I go on a mission, things appear, right? They say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Well, in this case, I was more than ready, and the opportunity appeared. It simultaneously in two ways. I listen to podcasts constantly, and I turned on a podcast with Rhonda Fitzpatrick. Found My Fitness is a podcast that I listen to. She interviews some really interesting researchers. She was interviewing David Snyder, who is the head of the Innovations Lab at Stanford. That's how I learned that there was such a thing. And he's been doing it for a really long time. And Stanford's had this lab for a really long time. And they're looking at all of this really interesting information on disease prevention and health span and lifespan extension and longevity. And one of the things that they've been looking at very closely is the impact of glucose control, particularly blood sugar spiking, and they use continuous glucose monitoring. And because it's been so successful and because they want more data, they spun off a little company called JanuaryAI.com, and you can get a continuous glucose monitor through there, right? And you have to answer a couple of questions, and they have a staff of physicians that takes a look at it, and they approve it, and boom, your monitor comes in the mail. It's, I think, $80. It's good for 30 days. And then you can decide after that 30 days, did you get enough information? I will probably do it long term, but did you get enough actionable information to change your behavior? I am really a nerd, so I'm going to want to know every single thing I do. How does that impact my blood sugar? So it's probably going to take me a good year to see all of those things so that I can create behaviors and lifestyle that's going to keep my blood sugar stable. But there is now an access point for everyone to more easily be able to get. And I do believe in the short term, we will see continuous glucose monitoring be just as easy as a Fitbit or a Whoop strap or anything else to track biometrics. So I would say that was so I was listening to that podcast, got very excited, and then finished that podcast. And in that same afternoon, turned on my favorite podcast I talked about before. It's called The Drive. Peter Attia, MD. He's a longevity physician. And his it was an Ask Me Anything episode, and it was all about continuous glucose monitoring. So, it was a pretty clear sign to me that it was time for me to move ahead and do this. I've been thinking about it for a while. So, what I'm going to propose is that all of you that are watching, first of all, understand that this is assuming that you're doing all these other things. You're optimizing your sleep, you're managing your stress response, you're working on, relationship and getting out of this crazy isolation that we've been in. You're moving your body every day, you're eating a reasonably decent diet. Assuming that you're doing all of those things, I would go to januaryai.com and answer their few questions and see if you cannot get yourself a continuous glucose monitor. I'm going to get mine probably in the next handful of days. I'm going to activate it right away. And I will report to you a month from now in the next episode how that's going for me and what I found, and continue with a little bit of discussion around the research on how significant the impact is on poor glucose control, and understand that it's different for everyone. And just because you look healthy and you're not obese does not mean that you're not on the spectrum. And in fact, I would argue that you likely are, because I think the research shows that about 70% of the population has some issue with glucose control. And over time, if that's not managed, it will eventually lead you down the path to type 2 diabetes, which I believe is about 30% of the population, which is frightening. So if that is one of the single most important factors that's going to impact your longevity and your health span, it seems to me that if it was as simple as attaching a little white disc to your arm and following that information on your phone to understand what you did during the day that caused that to go out of control, and you were able to change your behavior to fix that, it seems to me that would have a giant impact, not only on you individually, but probably our entire culture and maybe the whole world. So it seems to me that it's a huge, huge technological advantage that we should all have access to. If you have any questions, as always, please reach out to me. All my contact information is here for you. And again, if you've got topics you want to know more about, something you've heard about but you're not sure in the research, please let me know, and I'll make that the point of one of my future episodes. And remember, we will be moving to a once-a-month format, and I will report next month on my experience with the continuous glucose monitor. I hope you found this helpful, and I will look forward to seeing you all in mid-July. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.